Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And folks, Miss Suzanne just had a big problem right before we started recording. Uh, yeah, but I'm sure that the folks on the road will appreciate the fact that she will calm down very quickly once she gets behind the wheel because she's not that kind of a driver. But boy, let me tell you, Miss Suzanne walking back and forth on the driveway, and folks, that's not a short walk for us because something happened at the mailbox. We'll just leave it at that. And she's making an impact right now. Let me just say that. Camden, I think you might have seen that walk from Mom, particularly when she was heading right for you. Probably was the
Yeah, I think that's a familiar walk for me. Yeah, been a little while. I got to admit, though, probably about. I'd hope more than 10 years at least.
yeah. Well, like I said, when we were in the green room right before we hit record, I had to go on mute because I thought that walk was coming to me.
Gotta be
So
ready.
I just say, Brian, you ever had that experience where Mom or Mrs. Was doing that walk right for you?
Absolutely. I always dreaded those mailbox walks. I'm going to have to find out later what was in the mailbox this time.
Yeah, it wasn't what was in it wasn't supposed to be in it because it was supposed to be going out.
Ooh,
And our mailbox has a key, and it went into the received section, not the outgoing section.
that's a problem.
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Letters don't get mailed when they're in the outgoing section. It's funny how the postman does that. So, Brian Burwell joining us. Brian, I'm excited to dive into this because you are a person who has done that thing I always love to ask because I made a decision like this also in stepping into the entrepreneur space. But you were 30 years with Charles Schwab. That's a couple of days, and
Yeah.
that's some serious comfort zone. What was the catalyst that you said, all right, I'm out of corporate, I'm on my own?
Well, that's a great question. And I was with Charles Schwab for 30 years, but I was able to work in many different capacities at Schwab. So I wasn't an entrepreneur, but I always consider myself an intrapreneur, working inside a corporation, trying to build processes, project management, people development. So I always felt like things were changing, and that's what kept me there 30 years. I was on a big project the last couple of years. It was one of the biggest mergers in financial services history. That project was coming to an end. My role was going to come to an end. So I made a decision um, after the role was eliminated to do what I love to do at Charles Schwab. Like 20% of the time was coaching and just do that full time.
So Charles Schwab have a like a formal setup of mentoring and coaching within the corporation.
They do. It takes looks like a lot of different ways. I mean, we have a very extensive training department that takes care of some of that. We have had some formal mentorship programs as well, but a lot of it is informal mentorship and learning from your colleagues. So that's what I did a lot over the years, and that's what I used to create workshops within Schwab to try to get people thinking along those lines and taking a little bit more ownership of their careers.
I'm curious what that looked like from I guess, an organizational standpoint of allowing you to do that, because that sounds like an amazing thing. And you were the go-getter. You said the entrepreneur. I love that term. And looking to find those different ways. But there's a lot of bosses who would ring you back in and probably drive you out well before that 30-year mark.
That's right. And I think over 30 years, I've had many different kinds of bosses, like we all have. Um, some are more lenient as far as career development than others. Some of them are bottom line. But what I would say is if you hit your bottom line consistently and effectively, that gives you a little bit more leeway to create more projects, and especially if you could show an ROI on that project. And I know for one of my for former leaders, I'm a self-development junkie, just the way you two are as well. I know you're both lifelong learners. I'm a lifelong learner. And I would go to all these seminars. I would read books about development. I got certified with Clifton Strengths, which is the Gallup organization. So I would do a lot of these things. And then I would go to skip level meetings with staff, and I would say, well, you've probably heard of the 5 whys of project management. And they look at me like, no. I said, well, or another meeting, I'd say, well, you probably heard the story of John Wooden and what he would do the first day of practice. And people would say, no, we haven't heard that. And then I realized, like, well, not everyone is a nerd like me, and they're doing all of this discovery and self-development. So why don't I try to curate as much as I can and maybe roll it out to our organization as far as a workshop, right? So I mentioned it to my leader, and they were like, well, that's a good idea. And then I didn't do anything with it. And like 3 weeks later, they said to me, well, how's that workshop development going on? So I was like, oh, okay, you were paying attention. I better ask you.
Dang, I hate when that question happens when and you're like, they don't care about that. Then they circle back around and say, how's that coming along?
Yeah. And again, that's a good nugget that I learned, and I tell folks too, is announce it publicly. It makes you accountable, right? So if I had just kept the idea to myself, I probably never would have actually took an action on it. But since I made it public to my boss, which I regretted a few weeks later, but it definitely pushed me then to actually create this program. And then once I did, another department said, hey, I heard you did this with your group. Can you do it with our group? So it kind of grew organically that way.
I remember several times in the military, and actually I was just talking with a guy in another company yesterday. It kind of same thing happened, Oh, that's a really good idea. Why don't you do that? That sort of thing. Was it that, or did you have the full genesis and you said, hey, I think this is what we need to help us grow and be more successful?
Yeah, I think it was a combination. I just think I definitely saw a gap. I mean, not everyone had the time to do this self-development or the passion to do it the way I did, but I knew that they could benefit from it. So there was definitely, I knew what the ROI could be. I wasn't exactly sure what it would look like. And what I wanted to do was I didn't create a training, because I didn't want me to have a deck and here's a 30-page deck and everyone walks out and they don't remember, what was on slide number 1. So I tried to make it just more interactive, and here's some concepts and how have you done this in the past, and get more, it was more interactive, more buy-in. So I think learning, when it's a little bit of self-discovery, a little bit interactive, is more long-lasting than just, throwing a hour training at them.
You mentioned the importance of understanding the ROI of your projects when you're trying to create these new things. Obviously, you just said that it's hard to know that up front. Could you talk a little bit about what that ROI is for the leadership and self-development aspect? Because that's a really hard thing to measure.
It is hard to measure. Luckily at Schwab, we had engagement surveys, and we took those very seriously, and to see where employees are as far as their personal engagement, because as we know, engaged employees, they'll deliver better customer service, be better teammates. So we did use several different surveys over the years. So for this, I could actually show what was our survey scores prior to rolling out this program and what was it after. So we were able to, luckily, raise engagement scores. And you want to do it for the score itself, but you really want to, it's the spirit of it. If people can really feel like they're being developed and they trust their leaders are giving them that development, it'll naturally raise folks' engagement.
Could you turn it back? I mean, and just to dive into that a bit more on the ROI, could you, the surveys are great. And I agree with you. That's a great, I've been in a number of organizations where we've used that as a tool. But Did you ever connect the dots and the correlation between, hey, we're doing this and this is working out great, and look at the survey, and over here, by the way, look at the profit margin or the revenue margin, or however you measured it. Were you able to correlate that?
Yeah, for the last probably 20 years of the 30 years, I was mostly in operations. So we weren't revenue based, we were more service level based. So you could see, are we hitting our service levels? And I think I would like to think this training helped hit the service levels. But I think probably what I'm most proud of is people who went through these types of workshops and the iterations that we had. And what we tried to do is we rolled it out once. It was pretty good, so we wanted to continue it. But folks who would come up to me like in the hallway 3 years later and say, I remember that one story in the workshop, and they would just tell it back to me and where they took that in their own career. Because what we tried to do was not make it to be here's the career ladder. It's more like a career cargo net. It's like here's some ideas, and you might some people might go this way and then up and down, but the outcome really should be what you're passionate about.
Looking at the ROI there, I'm really curious. Almost like if you could give a little bit of the word that comes or the phrase that comes to mind is like elevator pitch of somebody trying to get their boss on board with this, because this is one of those things like we've talked about. It's hard to measure the ROI. Everyone knows personal development is so good and so this and so that, but it's like, okay, what does it really look like? Why do we need to spend time on it like right now?
So I think part of the pitch was, I think we were doing a good job of developing our leaders. When I say leaders, I mean people managers, right? People, and we had a lot of different programs for that. But what I would find, I would do skip levels. Like the last 10 years or so, I was a manager of managers. So I didn't have a team, the teams directly reporting to me, but the managers were. But I would do what we used to call skip levels, where I would go to these team meetings, but without their manager there, and just talk about different things. And like anytime the word leadership came up, it was almost always like, well, our leader's not here today, or they would defer to whoever their leader was. And one of the things that I had kind of learned over the years as a lifelong learner and curating this is you don't need a title to be a leader. And that was where my pitch was to my directors. Like, we're doing a lot of things for people managers, but how do we make leaders out of everyone in the organization in some form, right? Doesn't have to be a people leader. And I think luckily this particular manager kind of agreed with that assessment and knew some of the things that I was sharing in our leadership meetings that would benefit everyone across the organization.
That's great music to my ears. You don't have to have a title to be a leader, and it reminds me. I think I was trying to remember if I learned this in basic training or as a cadet at Texas A&M, that anytime there's more than one of you, oh, it was basic training. It was basic training. Anytime there's more than one of you is in charge. And you think about that. And then I'll take it the next step further in my military career, and that was working with indigenous organizations. And indigenous makes it sound like native tribes and loincloths and stuff like that. No, not loincloths, but partner nations, and doing some work with partner nations. And one of the things that you learn about is their leadership development system is very, very different. And that guy that may be the colonel, he ain't really the guy that's running the show. And you got to know who's running the show. Did you experience that? I mean, Charles Schwab is a huge organization. Did you experience that when you were still in the corporate world, where it's like, yeah, he's the executive vice president of this department, but that manager over there is really the guy who's running the works?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times the people who are closest to the work are the ones who really know how to get things done. Now, hopefully the folks above them give them the proper credit, because I've seen in any organizations, some people will know who's doing the real work and give them the credit they deserve. And my company was very good at that, by the way. But yeah, you'll find that the titles don't always mean who's doing the work or who can get things done. In your example, was it just did that happen organically in that community, or was it like done on purpose?
No, it happened organically. I mean, you could see that, the guy wearing all the medals and the rank sort of thing, he didn't have a clue what was going on or how something was going to happen. He was just there as a presence, collecting a paycheck. And the guy that was really running it was, a level or two below him, but he was the guy that I had to get close with, because I had to influence them to do things. It wasn't the guy who was sitting in the chair. Let's put it that way.
On that, though, I think this would be an interesting thing to dive in on, because this is always a interesting conversation around leadership. That it's like sometimes you look at a leader and like, well, they're not really doing anything, but that also could be the great leadership of enabling your team to do all of the stuff and keeping your job separate, really just managing it as a whole rather than getting in there and nitpicking at things. Brian, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. Of where is that line between being a great leader and just like not leading at all?
Yeah, and sometimes it's a fine line, and a lot of it is situational leadership, right? Because everyone has a leadership style, but your style might not fit that particular situation, right? So I probably more like a servant leader, coach leader. I like to coach people to do their best work, kind of find their sweet spot, how they can best contribute to the team. But there might be times as a leader, it could be a crisis situation, is like, no, I need to step in and make this decision, right? That's not my go-to style, but it's a situational style. So I think that's important, that managers don't get, or people leaders don't get hung up on one particular style, to know what the situation is and adapt to that situation, which I'm sure the military has that all the time, right? The situations on the ground change.
Oh yeah, yeah. The difference between the only ones I specifically remember. I mean, you mentioned servant and coach, but the ones I specifically remember from my time in the military and all the training was authoritative and democratic, and how you, depending on the situation, like you said, hey, the house is on fire. Guess what? We're not going to sit down and talk about how we're going to get out of here and discuss what might be some better options. No, we're going to get the F out of this place right now, and everybody's going to go this direction, and we're going to rally up, make sure we got, it's that sort of thing. We're no longer in this. What do you think, fellas? Do you think we should go out this door or this door? Or maybe we should go to who's got a better idea? Yeah. So, yeah.
So to keep going on this then, because that brings another question to mind then, of really talking about like the situational leadership and like recognizing those situations and using the right leadership style for the situation. How then, because then to me, my definition of great leader is somebody who can fit to those different situations, be a leader in all those different ways. But that's also kind of the, to take like the entrepreneur analogy, that's kind of like the C+ and everything, no A+ situation, where it's like, yeah, I can do everything, but I'm not great at this piece. Do you think that's or I guess, Brian, how would you interpret that? Do you think it is just having that C+ and all these different styles, or do you still need that, like, I am the best at this one?
I think it's, and I'd like to hear like your feedback as well, but I think it's important to have a consistent style, but be able to move around, right? So folks want consistency, they want stability. So if I came to work and one day I was authoritative, and then the next day I was democratic, and the next day they'd be like, what is, like, there's no stability there. And folks need, that kind of stable environment to perform their best. Now we know there's always changing, so we can't have it perfectly stable. But if their manager is different every day, that could be problematic. So I think it is a good idea to have a authentic style to you, be able to develop that the best you can, knowing that there might be times where you can overflex that or underflex it based on the situation. Um, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think Dad, you can go after. I was just going to say that to me, it's providing that structure. Also, the term that keeps going to mind is you're preventing like the power vacuum a little bit. Of if you are authoritative and then all of a sudden you step out, then that can kind of create a weird space where the wrong leader might step up, or no leader steps up and things kind of just fall apart. You need to provide that consistent structure to give them something to move off of, I think is what it comes down to. Because, yeah, you don't want to, like, I keep going out, and I'm in rugby because it's rugby season. Sorry to the listeners who don't like rugby as much as us. But, it's if you're consistently going through something and all of a sudden you're not there as the coach, then the players are just going to sit around chit-chatting. If you're never really there and you're letting them be free all the time, then they'll take that step. But they have to kind of be trained to do that. You can't just expect them to flex back and forth, willy nilly, just based on what you're feeling that day.
Yeah, I would say rugby is a great example because you can't call plays. What is the NFL has digressed to, or yeah, I'll call it. I believe it's a digression to the players getting both defense and offense getting a call from a coach who's got the bird's eye view, which is great, into their headsets out on the field. So there's very little action and activity. Yeah, there's audibles and all that, right? Omaha, that sort of thing. But I think the point of that is, if you're authoritative all the time, you're telling people what to do all the time, then there's no innovation. There's no space for them to do it their way. You're authoritative when you need to be, and you're democratic when you need to be. And those kind of leaders who understand, and this is why I believe leadership is a skill set that needs to be continually trained and refined, and we're continuous learning. That's why we talk about continuous learning, right? But because we have to know and we have to adapt. And I can tell you today, I can reflect back on many times that I was authoritative when I should have been democratic, and I was democratic when I should have been authoritative. And I can look back on those decisions in various environments, and those are lessons learned that I apply going forward because it's so important to do that. And, it's kind of getting me thinking, and I'm bringing this back around to you, Brian, because in an organization like Charles Schwab with such a dynamic and varying group, what were some of the leadership things, traits, tenets, you label it, that you're like, I want to be like that guy, and oh my God, I don't want to do that?
Yeah, great question. I think, and you mentioned it just now. You showed some self-awareness, right? There were some times when you didn't pull the right lever, like you should have been authoritative and you were democratic, or vice versa. So I think one of the things that I learned from great leaders is to be have that self-awareness, to ask for feedback, to understand if you went the wrong direction, learn from that, and then communicate very clearly with your team. Like if I blew the call, next time you and say, hey, now it's on me. I made that decision. Here is why I made that. Or even if it was the right decision, and I'm normally a democratic type leader, and I made a quick decision without everyone, just give them the why. It's like, hey, sorry about that, but the board meeting happened, went to this manager, rolled downhill really quick. I got a phone call and said, yes or no, this is what we need to do. And I had to make the call. So people get that, right? So even if you're a little bit out of character for one decision, if you communicate that with clarity, the why behind it, that still again helps build trust with your team.
Talking about choosing the wrong leadership style for the situation, I'd be interested to hear. I'll start with you, Brian, but Dad, you can join in also. Of how do you recognize those different needs? Because like picturing the group of people, and you're trying to be hands off leadership, and things are kind of deteriorating. Well, there's that fine line of, oh well, if I give them 5 more minutes, somebody's going to step up, and then they're all going to be aligned. They're going to be moving forward. Versus 20 minutes later and something's still not happening, and recognizing what the group needs at that different time. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, very, very tricky, and depending on the situation, what we try to do is do a lot of work with in this case, like I had a leadership team, so do a lot of work with the leadership team over time. So when we get in those situations, we recognize where everyone's coming from, right? So part of that is, I mentioned strengths, so we would do the Gallup strengths, and everyone got to know their strengths, but also the strengths of everyone else on the team. And that was very important because, as you mentioned, Cam, when things are happening, maybe it's a meeting, things are getting heated. If you know that people are acting on what their natural talents are, it might come across the wrong way. And an example that I always give is, one of my strengths is futuristic. So I kind of like to see, well, what's in the future? What do I want to do with the team? What's the vision? So I used to always run into my boss's office with these great ideas, and just like blah 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 blah. I couldn't even get it out of my mouth fast enough. And sometimes they didn't seem as excited about the idea that I was. And I walk out of the office, come back in 10 minutes later with another idea. So we actually took these strengths assessments, and I found out I'm futuristic was not my number one. Their number one was context. So what was it that I never gave them when I went running into their office? I never gave them context as to why this is such a great idea. So getting to know your team that way, whether it's strengths or there's other assessments or just in conversations, getting to know, like, what are people naturally good at? What is their intention? And so when they get into these heated meetings, the people will be like, oh, that's just Burwell being a futuristic maximizer, or they know I have the right intention. So doing a lot of that pre-work is really important versus not doing that kind of work and then being in those situations.
I want to
If
jump
you
on
had
something
been
there.
in,
Talking
I'll
about
make a comment.
the futuristic, and because I think a lot of if I had to guess, and you shoot, Brian, you might have the actual data on this because you seem like the type of guy. But the entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs and leaders who check both those boxes, I'm gonna bet that the majority of them fall into that futuristic. It's looking forward, seeing the opportunities, having all these ideas, good idea fairy, whatever you want to call it, shiny object, all those different things. How did you balance that for your team? Because if you can have the good idea fairy going up to your boss and just throw the good ideas, they're usually okay with that. Good ideas flowing down can completely kill productivity and kill their focus because they're looking at all these different things. How did you find that balance for yourself?
So when the ideas were coming to us and we're not picking them, or
no, for you as a leader to be futuristic, looking at all those different ideas, looking at all those opportunities, and then not just sending them all downwards to your team and confusing them about what the vision is, what the goals are, and those kind of things. Taking the future as too important so that they mess up the present, I guess would be another way to put it.
Yeah. That's a good point. And a lot of it is getting team buy-in, and also getting the strengths of the group as well. So I was very good at maybe ideation and thinking of some things. I wasn't that great at executing those because I had folks on the team who could do that. Also, I had folks on the team who might be better at risk assessment than I was, or would be able to poke holes in my ideas. So what I would make sure that as a leader, I wasn't just going to the team and say, I woke up today with 5 great ideas, like, let's go, right? I might just say, here's a few ideas. Any of these make sense? Could you make any of these better? And they could shoot them down. They could change them. They can then execute on it. But I was making sure that just because I was futuristic, I wasn't going to, burden my team with every day this guy comes in with 10 new ideas.
Yeah, what I was going to say is you would have been labeled when I was back in the unit the good idea fairy guy. Is like, geez, here comes Burwell again. Somebody don't lock the door. Lock the door. Damn it, we're too far down the road.
And I'm sure I got that label a couple of times, but that's okay.
Well, one other thing on that before we change the subject there. How did you, or I mean, this might just be a short answer, but I'm curious because being the good idea fairy, then when you're passing on things or people are shooting down ideas or, shutting the door because they see you coming down the hallway, like you were saying, Dad, that can kind of kill that creativity a little bit, kill that fire that you have. Could you talk some about maybe keeping that passion, keeping that creativity alive while also, being in the constraints of reality a little bit?
Yeah, that is tough, but that is really important because first of all, the financial service industry has a lot of constraints, right? There's regulatory bodies out there. It's very rules driven, so a lot of ideas that I could have could get shot down. There's budgets, right? So you might have a great idea, but there's no budget for that. So it's really just understanding. We might have some big ideas as a team, but also controlling the controllables, saying, okay, we have some great ideas here that's going to cost $10 million. All right, maybe we can't do that this year. Or maybe there's a regulatory component that we can't do that. But what was the genesis of the idea? Was it a process improvement? Was it a policy change? And is there anything in there that we can control? So control the controllables and take it that way. Take some small wins, aggregate those small wins over time, and then get some big gains.
Talk to us a little bit about it, because I find this an interesting subject. I don't know if I've brought this up with other guests before. The whole idea of innovation versus solving a problem. In the end, the execution of both become a similar path, but the ideation of, what if we did this versus, hey, how do we fix that? Could you talk us through a little bit of that thought process?
So I think they go hand in hand, but the danger is, you have ideation and you go take off and you solve this problem that you really didn't define the problem, right? So a lot of times, and I think the example I talked later is the 5 whys in product development. You ask why 5 times before you move forward to make sure you're actually solving the right problem. Because a lot of times we go into ideation really quick. Somebody brings up a problem and all of a sudden there's, hey, we could do this, and you have 15 good ways to solve it, and then you pick one and you end up solving the wrong problem. Like you didn't get to the root cause. And the example I always gave was, have you ever heard the 5 why example with the Washington monuments?
No, I haven't.
No.
So there was out of all the monuments, there was one that had stone deteriorating at the top. So someone said, well, why is that? Well, we had to power wash this over and over, like every day, and it's causing the stones to crumble. So if you go right into ideation mode, you'd be like, okay, well, maybe power wash less, maybe use it less chemical. But someone said, well, why do you power wash here versus the other monuments? And they said, oh, well, this monument has bird droppings, a lot of birds stay, so there's a lot of things that they have to power wash. So they asked, well, why are there bird droppings at this monument, not at the other monuments? So the project team said, good question, let's go research it. So they researched it and they found like there were little spiders at this monument that were attracting the birds, that was attracting the bird poop and the power washing. So they said, well, why are there spiders here and not at the other ones? So again, they did the research and they found that there were microscopic bugs at this monument that was attracting the birds, that was attracting the spiders. So they finally had asked why 5 times, and the last why was, well, why are there microscopic bugs at this monument and not the others? They did the research and they found out that they had changed the lighting in this monument to a fluorescent light that was attracting the bugs, that was attracting the spiders, that was attracting the birds, which would then had to be power washed. So they didn't have a power washing problem, they had a light bulb problem. So it's really important to really understand what the problem is before you go around solving it. So it's that balance between ideation and problem solving. I know I went off on a tangent there, but at this
No, but
point,
I'm singing. There was a little old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. And folks, if you ain't singing that song in your head right now, you missed out on your childhood. I can just say that.
there you go.
With that, I think there's an interesting piece of leadership there also of, I mean, it feels kind of silly because it's such a clear process, but keeping people on that can be difficult, because the idea of just stopping power washing every day and going to every other day, it's like, okay, we solved it. How do you communicate that to the team, or maybe communicate's not the right word, but how do you keep them on track moving forward through that process rather than getting distracted by all these other solutions that seem like they're going to work, but you don't know that until you go all the way through the process?
Yeah, and a lot of things that we talk about as far as leadership, we could tell one story or we could talk about it in one meeting, but it has to be over and over and over. Another maxim that we always had, I think this comes from the product world, is people need to hear things 7 times before they act or make a change. And we used to kid, make sure everyone hears this 7 times, 7 different ways, and getting people to really define the problem and not doing ideation right away. It was an ongoing conversation, ongoing coaching. And even like our business partners would come to us and say, hey, we need you to do X, Y, Z. And we would always stop and say, well, what problem are you trying to solve? Right? And really make them, instead of giving us a solution, that they would give us their problem statement, and then we could work with them on that solution.
Do you think that's 2 different skill sets, like the problem side versus the solution side?
It can be, yeah. There are probably some great people who could do both, but there are folks in a team environment who are really good at poking holes on things, asking questions. Then there's the people who could take away and come back with a solution. Could be the same people, but not always. And I think that goes back to, when you guys talk about, 10xing teams, that's how you do it, by creating synergy between the different thought processes. It doesn't have to be one person taking this from beginning to end.
I'm just chuckling to myself thinking, we've talked about it before, but the cost of innovation is so expensive. Innovation is such a buzzword now, and like all these different things with it. And it's like, is the solution to have your innovation department over here and then have a problem defining department next to it that feeds them the problems so that they're actually solving for the right things? I don't know on that.
It's a good thought. But I think it was Albert Einstein. I think he said this, but if you gave me a problem with 24 hours to solve it, I would take the first 20 hours really defining the problem. And we probably don't take as much time on that because we like to fix things.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's one of the reasons when I'm running my mastermind that we have a hard rule that in the beginning, it's the first 20, 30 minutes is defining and understanding background. And it's pretty funny when somebody new joins us, or one of the old hats slips up and starts to go down the path of, well, here's the solution, and everybody's like, you're breaking the rules. It's really you kind of got to be there. It is funny though. But I'd love to learn more about your book. I mean, the title I find fascinating, The Mailroom Mentor. Is that because you started off in the mailroom at Charles Schwab, or what?
I did not, but actually my dad, he worked for Citibank for 40 years, and he did start in the mailroom. So that was part of it. But also, so the book is about going back to leadership. Leading from your current role was a workshop that I used to do for colleagues. And it was, being a leader without a title. And there's three big themes to the book. One is, be your own CEO. And, like I was in one company for 30 years, but I felt like I was my own CEO leasing my services to this company, right? So I was in charge of my career. The second is crush it where you are. So do the best job in your current role. And then the third one is always be learning. And you can learn from books, you can learn from videos, but you can also learn a lot from different mentors who don't even need to be in an official role. So when I was first started in the industry, I worked for another financial firm, and there was this mailroom person who was kind of an older gentleman, probably at the end of his career or second career, and he was kind of like a get off my lawn kind of guy, really cranky every day. And if you didn't put the mail in the right way into his cart, you'd probably get yelled at. But every once in a while, he would say something that was really profound and a great leadership nugget, and I'd be like, I didn't expect that coming from this person. But that was really good. So one of the things I learned over the years is you can learn from different mentors, whether you meet them or not, whether you're just observing them, in all walks of life. So the title of the book, I wrote it kind of like in a fictional narrative in a story where there's a CEO of a company who retires, not ready to hang him up yet, wants to keep busy, so he gets a job in a mailroom. And as he delivers mail throughout this organization, he provides some leadership and some career advice along the way. So that's the gist of why it's called the Mailroom Mentor.
I love that, and I'm really curious, and I'm sure this is covered very well in the book. So if it's giving away too much of the secret sauce, folks, go buy the book, and Brad, we could just cut off the answer on this one. But I think the limitation that a lot of people run into when you say, to lead at your position, or view yourself as a business, view yourself as an entrepreneur inside of the organization, all those kind of things, is this well, I can't because of what they see in their environment. How do you? Or what are your steps, or your process, or maybe tips just to help people to start seeing how they can be a leader, even though it feels like they're confined into that box?
Yeah. So first, I would ask them, what is your role? What do you do? What assets are you building in your portfolio? So are they in sales? Are they in customer service? Are they in change management? No matter what it is, they're developing transportable skills that they can take with them in their next role. Might be in the same company, might not be. But really, it's controlling the controllables. What are you interested in? What do you want to become world class at? And develop that. Every role that they're in, they're responsible for something. So how do they make themselves the best in that particular role? And then they can move on to the next position. If their company isn't giving them the opportunity to move into the next position, then they can still develop and then take that transportable asset to the next place.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way of thinking about it. And and speaking of fascination, I was fascinated by your analogy of the cargo net, is what I learned, because I instantly flash back to a number of obstacle courses I've negotiated over the years, and for some reason, cargo nets are a key element of every obstacle course I think I've ever been on. And it's interesting because you're right. A ladder gives you one path to the top, and a cargo net, you can zigzag back and forth across. God, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could do that, or you could go about halfway up and then take a 45 and go to that far corner, because if you go over at that corner, you can get to the downside easier and get there faster and complete the obstacle course faster. All just, man, bringing back some very fascinating memories of different cargo net experiences in the past. Heck, this one just flashing in. World War II. Guys debarking the big ship into a landing craft using cargo nets. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot going on in my head about cargo nets right now.
The great military history of cargo nets.
Oh man,
That's your next book, yeah?
Camden, yeah, Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, so for me, it was, and I think this is so simple, but it's really important, is hit the bottom line first, then move on to your projects, then start pitching those ideas and all that kind of stuff. What it really reminds me of a lot, and maybe it's showing a lot of wisdom that this is connecting in different areas and different conversations we've had, Dad, but it goes back to what Scott Mann said, talking about military transition. You can't just rage against the machine. You're part of the machine. When you get out, you can't just throw everything away and be like, this sucks. People suck. Why aren't they doing this? If you do that, you never move forward with anything. You have to get the basics down. You have to be a part of the machine a little bit in order to start figuring out that path forward and figuring out how to make the machine work a little bit better. And so that just hits your bottom line. Take care of that. Because also, when it really comes down to it, if you're hitting your bottom line, you can run off and go do all those other things. They're not really going to care too much because you're doing your job first. So I really love that.
Awesome. Brian, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
I learned a lot. I would say one of the biggest things I'll take away, though, is the point you made, Otis, about influencing, and how you think it sometimes it's hierarchical, but it's not. Like, look at the org chart and really get to know folks, what their role is, and how do they fit into the big picture. And it might surprise you, like who you think is the leader may not be the one who's going to influence the group.
Very true. Brian, how do folks find you, learn more about what's going on, buy your book, all those good things?
Best way to buy the book, I think, is Amazon, Mailroom Mentor. You could just look for it there. As far as getting in touch with me, the best way is LinkedIn. And then you could just message me. If you're interested in learning more about the book or the workshops I do regarding the book, reach out to me there.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brian.
I appreciate you both.
Camden, once you're done coughing, run us out.
Hey, I timed that mute button right. You could have let that one fly, Dad. All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Brian Burwell, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch a full episode of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time.